Welcome, everyone, to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show. This is a podcast show dedicated to shining a spotlight on tech entrepreneurs, innovators, founders, and the compelling narratives behind the movements that they've established. I'm your host, Ryan Davies, and I'm hosting today's discussion on connecting farm to table through technology and innovation with Katherine Sizov. Katherine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. A little bit of a background for our listeners on Katherine. She is the founder and co-president of Strella Biotechnology. She attended the University of Pennsylvania, and while studying in college, she found a startling stat that 40% of our food is wasted. So with a molecular biology background, Katherine set out to discover resilient and data-driven solutions for food supply chains. And there at college, at a networking event, she met her co-founder, Jay Jordan, and together they founded Strella. So tell us a little bit about that background and I guess, the university journey and how Strella kind of came to be.
Yeah, for sure. I studied molecular bio in college. So kind of on the pre-med track, and the natural next step, the progression is to go to graduate school. So my focus was always on neuroscience and neurogenetics. And I was beginning to apply to graduate school around my junior, senior year. But something about that wasn't really striking my fancy. I don't know, my heart just wasn't in it. I couldn't see myself working on a PhD for 6 to 8 more years. And so I started thinking about alternative careers and alternative paths I could take.
Very good. And I mean, that's quite the jump going from, a molecular biology, that side background into I'm going to be a entrepreneur and I'm going to start something, right? So, as we mentioned in the intro there, you uncovered a stat around the 40% of our food is wasted. So where did that come from, and how did that kind of come to be? And then where did the idea from that go from, wow, we need to do something about that. I need to do something about that. What can be done here?
Yeah, for sure. So I think my background does have a little bit of entrepreneurship in it. So I was part of a lot of groups on campus. My dad started a company as well. And so I'd been kind of in that space, revolving in it. The 40% of food that's wasted before it's consumed stat was just crazy. It doesn't feel like it belongs in the 21st century. And immediately after reading that, I had a wave of guilt because I didn't know where my food comes from. I kind of just thought it came from the grocery store. So at that point, I started skipping class, going to grocery stores and farms and things like that, just to learn a little bit more about the chain. And the one thing that really stood out to me with my biology background is that ultimately we are moving perishable products that are living organisms, right? But we're not treating them that way. We're treating them like commodities, kind of like an iPhone, for example. And that seemed to be causing a lot of problems. And so could we start grabbing inputs from food that could help us know more about it, and then use that information to reduce food waste?
And I think you touched on it right there. It's a commodity versus, like you said, a living thing. There's a lot of ticking time clocks and things like that happen, and not all food is created equal. Not all, even like not all bananas are the same, or where they're coming from, and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of a bit of a, I guess, a more complicated journey than we know. So for our listeners' sake, like, walk us through a little bit of that journey and where that data kind of comes from, where it goes, okay, it's grown, it ends up on our plates, but where is that waste coming from to cause all these issues that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors for waste, but our company's kind of thesis revolves around two major points. The first one is that there's just a lack of quantifiable data in general. So we know people like growers who can drive down their orchard in their pickup truck and feel when apples are ready to be picked off the trees. And they're right, but that information isn't really transferable. And the second issue that I kind of noticed was that the supply chain is super siloed. So we're kind of playing a giant game of hot potato with perishable products. And that's not really efficient for the system as a whole. And so those are kind of the two areas that I wanted to tackle when working on solutions.
So tell us about that journey, right? So I think this is a common thing in tech, especially as you recognize a problem and then you go, I'm going to solve this, and there's no data for it, right? You're trying to now, I find there's two different schools here. One is there's such a massive data lake of information that people don't know where to start, or B, there's not enough information or nothing there that really correlates. how did you go into this process of collecting this data and being able to make sense of it and, correlate it to the problems that you're seeing?
Yeah, for sure. So we started with the second approach, which is there's not enough data. So we built a sensor technology that can predict the maturity of fruits and vegetables. So produce has a really big food waste problem. So basically, our technology can measure different gases that fruits and veggies produce as they ripen. If you've ever put an unripe banana next to a ripe one, you see that it ripens faster than if it was by itself. And this is because fruits talk to each other using gas. And so we're basically able to intercept these kind of secret conversations between plants and translate them into a shelf life. And by knowing what the expiration date is effectively on produce items, we're able to be a little bit smarter about how we're moving things across the chain. As a company, though, we've definitely expanded past that kind of initial sensor input. So grabbing additional things data that already exists in the chain, like harvest information, quality control data, and such, in order to reinforce our models.
So that takes a lot of, again, ingenuity, innovation, creativity. I know you've been featured for that with like IBM, I believe it is in that series and whatnot. Um, Tell us about, how, again, what's your process? I know when we kind of talked about this, you said, you've gone through this now. You've almost, I can tell already, you've got that scientific mind, so you're very methodical in your approach and things like that. Growing a business methodically and to that extent, taking this data, turning it from ideas to actual technology to product, right? There's a whole thing there. I know that's a loaded question for you, but take us a little bit through that journey as well of, that, okay, creating the technology to product and that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I heard a quote somewhere that was like, good ideas are really simple, but just, you take them to their absolute limit. And so I think that's kind of what I did. What my process looks like is, okay, 40% of food is wasted. Why does that happen? How can we solve the problem? How can we really drill down into potential solutions and test them? To your point, I think the standard scientific method is pretty good. So there's a lot of testing and iteration, making sure that you understand what metrics you're trying to hit and what you're actually trying to accomplish, and breaking that down into bite-sized pieces. I think a lot of people get a little overwhelmed with the big picture of like, this gigantic, they have a gigantic company in their head that's worth a bajillion dollars, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to think about like, what can I do tomorrow? And so figuring out what you can reasonably accomplish in a short period of time that gets you that snowball effect you're looking for.
And with that in mind, I mean, let's shift gears a little bit again. We go back and we talk about, this came from a networking event, is where, you found your co-founder. I know you've done a lot in that area, the Seattle GeekWire pitch competition, for example, right, to be able to grow. I think that's one of the things, and again, we've done a few of these episodes, and in previous episodes for our listeners, they've heard the importance of, yes, there's a lot of rigid planning. Yes, there's a lot of structure to building a business, but building that network and putting yourself out there and doing that is a key piece of the puzzle. So how have you been able to put that into action and really, again, put that, so you've had this rapid growth and being able to reach so many different people and pick up so much in the technology area?
Yeah, for sure. So when I was still in college, I was pretty penniless. I was actually living on food stamps and stuff. And so I needed to fund even like my experiments and things. And so I would regularly attend pitch competitions just to like make some money. And the first like $500,000 that we raised for a company was entirely pitch competition based. And it also like taught me how to craft a good pitch deck, a good story, what's compelling to people, how to talk to people, because networking can certainly be a little intimidating, still is to this day. And I also think, the nature of my business, which is agriculture, is a very person to person interaction. There's no, there is nothing that will ever replace meeting someone in person. And I feel like, especially in my industry, I can feel that.
Absolutely. And, again, we're talking with Katherine Sizov here about growing, right, and being able to make this, bring it into action and whatnot. And you've got a unique look at this and being a young female entrepreneur, right? So there's certainly strengths and drawbacks to that and challenges from that perspective. For our listeners, tell us a little bit about that. I'm always fascinated by that side of the journey, both being young and trying to to grow, and then also from the female side of things and different doors that maybe it does or doesn't open, and how some of our listeners who might resonate with that be able to take advantage of certain opportunities they may not see right now.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, the combination of those factors causes me to stick out in certain rooms sometimes. It can come with its challenges. I think for me, the way that I see it is, you know, if I am sticking out, I'll take that advantage to pitch and try to bring my company forward. And so, regardless of why someone might be coming up to me, they are going to get my sales pitch. And hopefully that leads to a positive outcome for my business. On the youthfulness side, I mean, I think, in Zen, there's this concept of beginner's mind, of being able to see things from a fresh perspective. And I think in industries, especially like ag, where it's a little bit kind of archaic, there's a lot of practices that have been around for hundreds of years. Bringing that brand new kind of bright-eyed, bushy-tailed look into the industry can sometimes be a huge advantage.
And you mentioned before, you've got family experience in entrepreneurship and starting a business and growing. But again, being young and finding something that's so unique and a great market niche, and being able to say, okay, great, this has a lot of merit, a lot of value. You've grown very quickly. How have you been able to kind of grow yourself personally in all of the things you need to know outside of the science side, or outside of like, again, is it networking, is there education that you've taken, or certain, hey, a great place or a great resource is this, or don't discount that, anything that you can share from that perspective?
Well, learning is definitely, and actually tearing yourself down and rebuilding yourself, I think is the hardest part of this entire journey, because it's a constant process of self-improvement, which everyone wants, but then, the actual process of it is pretty painful. So I think a lot of my learning has just been, I want to do a good job. And so I will seek out resources in order to try to do my best at it. Although I will say being a CEO is especially at a company my size, is usually learning how to do something really poorly. And then as soon as you get somewhat good at it, you can hand it off to someone else. So I always kind of have a little bit of like, I'm always doing things okay until I can hire someone to do them better. But yeah, education is super important. I mean, I harp on that with my team for sure. Is learning is an ongoing process and it never stops.
I think, that is a incredibly relevant, important point, is, for a strong CEO, and I hear this a lot, the ones like yourself who have been successful and quickly and been able to adapt, is understanding that I don't need to be perfect at it, and I need to let go of things at times, right? So that is a very challenging thing, and I'm so glad that you were able to bring that up. And with that in mind, you have scaled the team to quite a significant size, in a quite a short period of time, it appears like. Tell us about that journey. I mean, finding the right people, how difficult it is, and maybe some of the secrets to success that you've been able to almost unlock for yourself, to say, hey, this is where I didn't do so well in my first journey through this, but my second time now, or my third, I've kind of got the system, or something that I really I like to cling to.
Yeah, I think team is the number one most important thing. It's the hardest thing and also the most rewarding part of the whole journey for me, at least. I'm very hands-on with hiring. That's kind of, it's a sacred thing to me. I think the biggest thing I've learned there, and I've been talking about science, but the reality is, the thing I've learned is that you need to trust your instincts. Like, we as humans, when we meet someone, we know how we feel about them. We know whether we trust them or not. We know, we can sense if we think that they're truly good at their job or not. And so just kind of leaning into that and learning how to train that muscle, so that you can make more precise decisions more quickly, um, is kind of my 2 cents on that.
That's that amazing, that CEO feel, and that founders feel, I think, where like your entire business is built off of data and information and being able to correlate. But like you just said, instincts is such a big thing, and being able to trust them and hone that skill and things like that, where it kind of goes through it. you mentioned before, maybe you've had a couple challenges in the past or things like that. I mean, I'm sure it hasn't been a golden road all the way through, as you mentioned. What are some of the things that you've kind of run into where you, again, if you're starting up business too, or if you're networking, or if you're mentoring somebody, where you say, hey, this is a pitfall, or this is something where you need to be able to, besides the, don't be a control freak, hand off the stuff that you can hand off. Are there other things that come to mind where you say, if I were to do it next time, maybe this is something I might do a little differently or approach it a different way?
I think a big one is market research. So I kind of see that a lot in general is people might have a really great idea, but they don't test that idea. And so it might be really good for you and you might think it's awesome, but make sure that someone actually wants it or cares about it. Um, we've like one of the mistakes I've made was around pricing. So, you go to business, I didn't go to business school, but I took a couple classes. There's like ways that you set pricing on an Excel sheet. That's great. Does it actually apply to the real world, and how can you test that when you're launching a new product is really important. Um, yeah, I think market research is a big one. I think trusting your instinct is a big one. I think staying optimistic is also a big one. You can look at the same coin, two sides, and it's really important to make sure that you're constantly staying positive and seeing what could happen, because otherwise you're just going to kind of get mired with like a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts, a lot of fear.
And I think, again, going back to your personal journey and also what you're going through, like in building this business, you've got to be a bit of a chameleon. You must be, because I have a background in supply chain solutions and like IoT technologies and things like that. But I also have a family in farming and agriculture, and I could never talk to the two of them the same way, even though they're so close together. And then now you're talking to also, end users in terms of the grocery chains and things like that. So you've got another hat to have to wear. How have you been able to do that successfully? How have you been, is that something you're experiencing? First of all, I should confirm that before I make assumptions, but, how have you been able to navigate that so successfully, and what, tell us a little bit about that journey and how you've got to, again, depending, I guess, recognize where you're walking into and speak the language, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of my favorite things is finding a common language with people. I like people and I want to connect with them. And so, yeah, it depends on what kind of room you walk into, um, what you're saying. And it's not that you have to say entirely different things. I think you can still be the same person and have congruence amongst all of the different messages that you deliver. But it might just be that certain people have certain interests. So, for example, we have like a biosensor technology. We have a lot of cool like chemistry that we've done in order to measure these gases, but a lot of our customers don't really care about that. I think it's super cool. I think the scientific community finds it interesting, but when we go and communicate that to a customer, we're focused on the decision that we help the farmer make, for example, because they're already way too busy. They're already super swamped. They don't need more information. They don't care. They just need help. And so just identifying what the other person needs and is looking for and trying to build a true connection with them based on that is, I love doing that. That's like a favorite thing for me.
And I think what you touched on there a lot too is one of the most common problems that we hear about or that we see is that bridge from technology to product, right? From we've got it, now I got to, it's proven, now I've got to package it up and have it out there for people. You've touched on the pricing and the market research and things like that, but kind of how did that work for you in terms of we've got it all, the data backs it up, now I've got to build it into a sensor and I've got to communicate this thing that nobody's heard of, right? This is something totally new and innovative, to have such a rapid uptake of it. Like how have you been able to make that journey so successful for yourself?
Well, testing first of all. So again, it's a really iterative process, and so you don't get to the final stage immediately. And I've heard someone say if you're not embarrassed of the versions you're putting out, you're not moving fast enough. And I think that's been pretty accurate for us thus far. So definitely a lot of iteration and testing, listening to what the customer feedback is, and incorporating that has been truly critical. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear it, but the way that we did sales was cold emails, cold calling, just show up, which is really a slog and really annoying, but anybody can do it. And so that's how we were able to start in the industry. So we didn't have any prior connections or anything.
I love that. It's just a story of persistence, and again, not being afraid to fail. In fact, embracing it. If like you said, if you put something out there and you're embarrassed by it, or you take a shot at a sales pitch and you go, "I didn't go well," it's a, what did I learn from it, and how am I gonna shape it forward? And now here we are with Strella. I believe it was the Washington Post article that said that you're overlooking, what is it, 15% of apples now? Is that the number? Give me some key numbers here, some fun numbers that I'm sure you've got them all up in the back of your head from your pitches now, but I think that's just an astounding stat.
Yeah, so to date, we've monitored over 2 billion apples and pears,
Wow.
and we've prevented about 20 million pounds of apples from going to waste. So that's why I like working in the supply chain, because there's the volumes are just so big, and there's an impact you can make even as a small company. That's significant.
That is absolutely incredible. Tell us about, I know you're traveling right now. You were saying you're always on the road, and I got to look out the window or check where you are kind of ideas. So that's amazing. Again, like putting in those miles and whatnot. But what's the next steps for Strella, and what does the future hold, and kind of the goals for the company, and what have you put in place to make it reality?
Yeah, so kind of to one of the points you brought up, there's additional data that's kind of floating around the chain that's currently not really being used. And now we have data on 15% of all the apples in the United States. So we have a really large data set. And so kind of our next step is to try to think about how can we build a more sophisticated decision making? How can we branch out from kind of our core products into new solutions, using the information that we have already gathered and all the things that we've learned along the way.
Amazing. So Katherine Sizov, with the founder and co-president of Strella Biotechnology, how can our listeners kind of find out more about you, get in contact with you, learn more about your journey, and maybe even pick your brain for some of that, some of those, I'd say juicy apples, but I guess we'll just say the juicy nuggets that are up there for being able to help their business grow and thrive, like Strella has?
Yeah, so our website is www.strella.ai. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Pretty active on there, so feel free to shoot me a message, and happy to connect.
Amazing. So with that, I mean, I think that kind of brings this part of our journey to a close. We've talked about everything from, networking to start in college right through to today, where you're on the road and continuing the journey here, and helping, just a problem that many of us had no idea, including myself, how big it was, and how much it existed, and how like you said, I'm gonna feel a little guilty now too, going, okay, great, be a little more sensitive here with this kind of stuff. So Katherine says, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And I want to thank, again, Katherine and all our listeners for this amazing podcast of connecting farm to table through technology and innovation. And I want to thank our listeners. We can't do anything that we do without you. So until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, I'm your host, Ryan Davies. Keep grinding out there, everybody. Stay curious, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.